Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're bringing back KCD himself, Kent C. Dodds. How you doing?
I am muted. No, I'm doing great.
Great,
Uh,
good. We got an echo for a
good.
second, but it seems to have self-healed. We're good, everyone? All
Yeah,
right? Huh?
hopefully.
Okay, perfect. I'm having I just got this ping video, and I think it does something about like echo cancellation. But as far as I can tell, it's got like a 3-second delay once you start things, but it all seems fine now.
Interesting.
Um, okay, cool. We're ready. So, Kent, I think you might be one of the few people on this show who needs no introduction, but just in case, for folks who aren't familiar with your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show again. I guess that means that it wasn't that bad last time. So, um, yeah, it's always an honor to get invited the first time, and it's a real honor to get invited the second. So yeah, I live in Utah in the United States with my wife and 4 kids and dog. And let's see, I like to ride my one wheel in the summertime. It's like an electric skateboard sort of thing, but it's like a go-kart wheel in the middle. It's amazing. It's so fun. Go look up one wheel if you haven't heard of it. And in the wintertime, I like riding my snowboard. Except I broke my clavicle recently, so I haven't been doing too much active stuff. I also play soccer on Wednesday nights, and I haven't been able to do that recently either, which is a bummer. But as far as like the technical stuff, I created epicreact.dev and testingjavascript.com. I have a lot of stuff on kentcdodds.com. Also pretty active on my YouTube channel. I've got a pretty active Discord as well. And I, back in November, joined the Remix team to be the director of developer experience. And so we're going to get exposed to some things that are my responsibility, and hopefully it goes well, because if it doesn't, it's my fault. So yeah, that's me.
Great. We've got some folks in the chat saying it's nice to see you moving both arms again. I will second that. Happy to see that you're recovering well. Um, so we're talking about today. We're talking about Remix, and specifically a brand new feature of Remix. I think actually unreleased feature of Remix. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was going to be released, but yeah, um, we ran into a couple of problems that we're going to work through today when we go through it. So it'll probably be released this afternoon, maybe even next week. So we'll just have to see.
It's a little sneak preview of a new feature coming to Remix either today or next week. Um, but we'll talk more about the feature in a second. But I'd love to just start with kind of, we've been hearing a lot about Remix lately. You've obviously been very excited about Remix for a while now. We've been seeing some really cool stuff, cool demos. I'm a fan of Remix. I moved learnwithjason.dev is now built on Remix, and built a couple other little fun things to just kind of learn the new stack and all those good things. So for folks who aren't familiar, who are aware of the name of Remix but haven't had a chance to look at it yet, what would you say is the overarching like elevator pitch for it? Why would somebody look at Remix versus other ways of building websites?
Yeah, my single statement pitch for Remix is Remix enables me to build excellent user experiences and not feel ashamed of the code that I had to write to do it. uh, so um, it also like you know how when somebody brand new is learning web development, and so they learn CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and then they want to go and build like an app, and they have to jump over this huge webpack, everything, all of the things thing to get over to React, and it's just this really huge leap that they have to go through. Remix also makes that more of a stepping stone, a lot easier, because it eliminates the need for application state management for most cases. It's nested routing makes things a lot easier to think through. It embraces the web platform at a huge degree, to the point where most people who are using Remix find themselves on the MDM, the Mozilla Developer Network web docs rather than the Remix docs. which is really cool. So it's not just another framework, it's actually something that's going to help make you a better web developer. And then like the biggest thing for me is in the web, we have the client and we have the server. In between these, we have what I call the network chasm, where it's like it's something completely out of your control. And it's really difficult to communicate the state that lives and is persisted on the server onto the client, and then to communicate it back across that that network chasm. And so Remix very uniquely builds a very solid bridge across this network chasm. And it's able to do that because Remix is your bundler, and it's your data fetching library, and it's your router. And by
Mhm.
being all of those things, it's able to do a lot of things that are unique, that other frameworks can't do. Whether you're talking like backend heavy frameworks like Rails or Laravel, or if you're talking about front end heavy frameworks like Gatsby or Next. And the last thing that I'll say, and then I'll stop talking, is a really common question that we get is, how does Remix compare to Next.js? And that's a very nuanced question with a lot of nuance in the answer. And so we put together a very in-depth article about it on our website. If you go to remix.run and click on the blog link and look for the Next versus Remix blog there, you will find a really in-depth article there that basically says Remix is faster than Next, and the developer experience is better too. So you can go take a look at that. I'm not going to dive too deep into comparing to Next. So
Well, so I think,
that, yeah,
you know,
Remix is pretty great.
what I've seen out of Remix that I have liked is, I mean, the thing that really jumps out to me is that, you know, I come from pre-CSS web dev days. I
Whoa,
remember
man.
cutting up images into tables, and, you know, that was how you did styling, right? And so I'm very standards web dev. Like when I started writing JavaScript, there wasn't jQuery even, there was just DHTML. And so my first experiences were very much like, all right, let's see if I can write a XML or HTTP request object, and, you know, all these really low level JavaScript things that I honestly think are part of the reason why JavaScript got a bad name, is because
Yeah.
early days that stuff was really hard. There were a lot of concepts and not a lot of great docs. This is before MDN, and, you know, I remember being in the W3 schools forums just being like, somebody please help me, I have no idea what's going on. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that the way that I used to build websites pre jQuery is very similar to the stuff that I'm doing in Remix now. Like
Mm,
semantic HTML, you're relying on a very little bit of custom JavaScript, as opposed to, you know, every form submission, every button click, every state transition is driven by a JavaScript event listener. Or, you know, if you're using an abstraction like React, you've got use effects everywhere, or things like that. And what's been interesting is that like I feel like I've gotten better at HTML. You know, it's been a good refresher in HTML to dive into Remix. And
mhm.
I love it when a tool feels like it's using the platform. I think one of my biggest gripes about a lot of frameworks is that they make it seem like you can't do some of the things that the framework's showing you how to do without the framework.
Yeah.
And, you know, the a big pitfall for me has always been, if I'm looking at an HTML form, and I get the impression from reading, you know, the React docs or the Vue docs or something, that the way that you deal with forms is to add a form submit listener, and then you have to like get the, you know, programmatically store all of the form values in state, and then you have to take those out and put them into a JSON object and then manually post that. And it's like, okay, we can do that, that's fine. But like also there's the form values, like you can just create a new form data object and then say, give me the values, and I can just submit this to a page and it's just there. I can just get it by reading the body object. And there's all
Mhm.
these things that are just built into the platform that I feel like don't get taught right now. So that was, I think, one of the things that I got most excited about with Remix. And that feels that kind of, you know, looking at the history of you and Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson, who are the three kind of driving forces behind this. And then also I know you've got like Chance Strickland on the team, and
Mhm.
other folks who, all of you kind of seem like use the platform has been a kind of a drumbeat even before Remix with other projects that you've built.
Yeah, that is very true. I remember when use the platform, the hashtag became popular, and most of the people who were pushing that were saying stop using React and use the platform, which is kind of interesting now because I don't know of anybody who uses the platform better than Remix does. And so um, the platform for me during that time, I was like, well, yeah, but the platform's not serving my needs. It's not doing what I need it to. And I think it wasn't so much that as it was my abstractions weren't exposing the platform to me. And so now Remix is able to do that. But yeah, like with React Testing Library, for those who don't know, I created React Testing Library. It uh, I got really tired of having all these wrappers around DOM elements in my tests with Enzyme. And I said, just give me the DOM. I can like do stuff with the DOM. I can make assertions
Yeah.
on DOM nodes and stuff. And so that's where React Testing Library came out of. Was I was just that I have this tweet where I showed like, here's what I have to do to get a DOM node out of a thing with the Enzyme. It was like 6 unwrapper calls, and it was super weird. So yeah, using the platform has been an important thing for me. And what I think makes Remix kind of special is that, like, I mean, the backend frameworks in particular use the platform probably more than front-end frameworks because they rely on the browser to do its post stuff and for form submissions and stuff like that. And what makes Remix unique to those is that the same code that you write for handling stuff on the back end and generating HTML is the exact same code that hydrates on the client. And so you're able to drastically simplify that client and server interaction there. On top of that, Remix uses JavaScript to progressively enhance the experience, not enable the experience, which is really important difference. Like right now, if you go to youtube.com and you don't have JavaScript, the whole experience doesn't work at all. They don't even server render anything. So like nothing will load. You don't even get to like have a bunch of links, let alone forms working.
And so like I I'm going to tread carefully here because my goal isn't to like poke fun at any other tools, but when like that's not Remix, or sorry, that's not React, right? Like where
Right.
YouTube isn't built in React or Angular or Vue, right? It's isn't it
Yeah, it's
web
a Polymer
components?
thing. Yeah.
Polymer.
Hmm.
And so the thing that I find interesting is, you know, the tension that I've felt when trying to use Next or Gatsby before that, or when I was even when I was using like just create React app and Webpack Babel kind of setups, is I always felt this weird tension where I felt like I was moving people further away from what was happening.
Hmm.
And I think like there's a good argument to be made for this idea of like progressive disclosure of complexity, where you take somebody and you basically say, okay, make no decisions, you're going to get a great outcome. But if you need to change something, I'll expose the piece of complexity that you need, but not like the whole thing. It's not like ejecting in the original Create React App setup, where you either went all in on Create React App or you immediately owned the entire source code with no in between, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I also think there's this interesting thing that happens with API design where sometimes an abstraction is worth completely eliminating the thing. I don't need to care how an electrical impulse gets from one of the keys on my keyboard to a character on screen. That's an abstraction that I'm happy to allow, never ever need to care about that.
Hmm.
But when I'm building a website, we're not quite at the point where I'm comfortable with the abstractions like completely eliminating what the browser is doing. And some of my feeling about using some of these tools is that they're basically saying like, come into this tool and then this tool is how you build for the web, not like the web is how you build for the web and this tool augments that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very well said. I think that we are the web platform is powerful enough that it doesn't need to be abstracted away. The frameworks need to abstract in such a way that they expose the web platform in a consistent manner. And in particular, something cool about Remix is that the server adapters their entire job is to take whatever platform you're deploying to, whether it be Netlify or Vercel or like Express or whatever, and converting that into a request response API that is the web platform API for fetch. And so you're interacting with web fetch APIs, which again, like leads people to the MDN docs instead of Remix, which I think is really useful. So yeah, Remix does an excellent job of exposing web platform APIs to you, so that you can have the control over things that you want, because the web platform is quite powerful. And so yeah, that's one of the ways that Remix makes it straightforward. And as far as like the developer experience of that, it ends up being really awesome as well, because the web platform, like you hear these people who've been in web for a long time, and you are in that group, who are lamenting how hard it is to build websites these days with all the tools that you need. And it's because the mental model of the web is actually really simple. You are on a page, you have HTML, the user submits a form that posts to another page. And so you're just like moving around to these pages, and you can think about the client being completely stateless, which drastically simplifies things. Of course,
Right.
there's a reason that we don't do it that way, because it's not a great user experience. I don't want a full page refresh everywhere. I've got accessibility to think about and stuff like that, and performance. And so what makes Remix really special is that it's the first framework that I've seen that allows you to have that mental model, but be completely like work completely in the browser as well as a single page app where there's client transitions and everything, and preserve the mental model. That's the key. Is it preserves that same mental model of what the browser does for form submissions. All of your mutations are declarative. Of course, there are mutations that happen like behind the scenes without the user interacting. Those are going to be imperative. But like you have a form on the screen, that's all nice and declarative. Transitions between different routes is all declarative, thanks to just the way that that React model works. But this is, I think, what makes it really special. And because Remix is managing all of that for you, it drastically simplifies the code that you write as well, because you never need to write any code that says, okay, well, the user made this change, so I've got to go and update my state. That is not a thing that you think about when you're using Remix. Your Redux store is the database, which is to say you don't have a Redux store. You don't need Redux or React Query or any of these when you're using Remix, which drastically simplifies your code.
Yeah. Well, and I think like a good testament to that is that Remix is built around this idea of like start with the platform and just add convenience on top instead of making Remix the point of like instead of making Remix the end all be all of how you build a site. I had this moment where I was talking to Chance on your team, and I was asking about like some of the pre-rendering stuff, and could you use Remix as a static site generator, and he basically was like, yeah, if you look at the root document for a Remix app, there's a scripts element or a scripts component. If you take that scripts component out, you're now serving a Remix site with no JavaScript. Like you're not going to get page transitions or preloading or some of the fancy features that you get by doing this progressive enhancement, but it's just a statically rendered site at that point. You are basically putting assets out onto this page, and they'll work without JavaScript, they'll work without framework, they just function.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a pretty strong testament to the fact that what's happening in Remix is pretty unique, because other frameworks you can't really serve them without JavaScript unless you're looking at something that's built that way. Like 11D is built for this purpose, but you kind of run into the other end of the problem where when you get to the client side, you're like, I want to progressively enhance, and 11D is like, cool, do whatever you want. And you're like, oh, like you don't help at all.
Yeah.
And it's and I do think that's nice for certain apps, and I build a lot of stuff on 11D specifically because I don't want to have to write a React use effect when all I really needed was like one button to click, right?
Yeah, sure.
But what I like about that is, you with a lot of the heavier JavaScript frameworks, you're just kind of bought in. You're either server side rendering and you have to do some manual work to strip out the JavaScript and make it actually function without JavaScript, which is fine, or you're paying these really high hydration costs because it's loading in a ton of stuff. And like you're going to pay a hydration cost with Remix too. And I found that when you include that, because you're turning the static HTML back into an app so that you can do these dynamic things. But it does feel different when, in one case I remove a scripts component and the site still works. And in the other one, there's no way to remove that scripts component. I got to do special config or do some kind of like post processing to get that same outcome. Um, it feels like priorities, right? Like different
Mhm.
trade-offs were considered when building one versus the other. And for my taste, for the way that I like to build for the web, I like the trade-offs that Remix has chosen. That's kind of why I'm gravitating toward it generally when I'm looking at more aggressive app builds, something that's more full featured and does a lot. I lean toward the trade-offs that Remix makes,
Yeah.
because they feel easier to manage and easier to back out of. If I just delete that Remix scripts tag, I can take that HTML and move it somewhere else and do something different with it if I want, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it feels easier for me and less sticky than some of the other framework solutions.
Yeah, that's one thing that we really optimized for was, adaptability, because a lot of frameworks will, like, the first thing that they wanna show you is, "How do you get started with this framework?" But how often are you starting with a framework? Every day you go into work and you don't start with a new framework or start with the framework that you're using. You maintain the existing app that you've got. And so, that's what, the one thing that I really like about Remix is that, you can have the benefits of static site generation or server-side rendering or a completely static site, no JavaScript, or any of these. Like, you can take all of those approaches and keep the mental model, and that's huge. If For a lot of frameworks, you say, well, this framework only does static site generation, or this framework kind of lets you choose between those two. And if you go down one route of static site generation, then later decide, hey, I want something dynamic. Well, now you have to re-architect how you're doing it completely. Like, you can reuse some components and stuff, but like how you load data and how you handle mutations and all of that completely has to be rewritten. Whereas with Remix, you write it one way, and then depending on how you have things set up, you can completely change the behavior without changing the mental model, which that is huge. And so it's very adaptable in that way. So you could say, hey, and actually, because of nested routing, this is a very interesting piece too. Um, Gatsby and Next have file-based nested routing, and
Okay.
various other frameworks do this as well, where you have the routes defined in your file and your pages directory. Remix does this too. We have a routes directory. But the difference is that in Next and Gatsby, each one of those modules is responsible for the entire page when you're on that route. That means it's
Mhm.
responsible for the left nav and the top nav and loading the user and all of that stuff. So it's not just the UI. UI is easy. That's, you make a layout component, whatever. It's the data that's hard. And so if you don't have true nested routing, then you're responsible for loading all of the data to get that stuff into the UI. With Remix, because it has true nested routing, when you're at one of those routes, you're only responsible for the part of the UI that your URL segment is responsible for. And so you only load the data for that, you only load the UI for that, and then all of your parents are responsible for their portion. This has a huge impact on the ability for Remix to optimize data loading as the user navigates around, but also a really big impact on the developers. So, like, you've got a team that's responsible for the shell of the app. They're taking care of the header and the footer or whatever. And then you've got various teams responsible for different pages. If you don't have true nested routing, if that header footer team needs to change some API or needs to load some additional data, they need to choose. They need to say, okay, we need to communicate to every team that they now need to load this additional data and pass it to us as a prop, or we'll just load it in the client. And which of those two sounds easier? Well, certainly it's loading it in the client. And so now you've got loading spinner, which is a less optimal user experience. But it's the easiest path forward. And so that's another really special thing about Remix is when you have true nested routing, that team can just say, "Oh, I need some more data. I will go get more data because I'm in control of all of this." So, yeah, nested routing is actually it's easy to underestimate how powerful that is, but it's a big part of what makes Remix apps so adaptable as well, adaptable
Well,
to change.
One of the things that I found with it that I thought was really fascinating is I built this little app called Snack.tips, and the goal of it was to put places that I like to eat on a map. Because people ask me for food recommendations, and I end up having to type out this list every time. So like I should just put this onto a website, right? And so I built a
That's
little
like that's such a web developer thing to do. Like your regular friends wouldn't say, "I should just put this on a website." They'd be like, "I'll put that in a note on my iPhone." And
Fair enough, fair enough. But so I was like, and I wanted to I wanted to play with the Mapbox API, and I wanted to learn a few other things. But what I ended up doing was making a remix site, and I use Sanity for data management and Mapbox for data display, and then everything else just kind of spits out as structured data on the page.
Hmm.
And when I was doing this, I like put in a sidebar that has a list of everywhere you can go, and the Mapbox stuff up top shows all these places on a map. And when you click on one of them, it changes the main frame to show what restaurant, the restaurant details that you've clicked on. And I also wanted it to like show the map more zoomed in on where this place was.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I figured out Mapbox has this little helper API that'll just do like a zoom to, so a little animated move on the map. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool if I could do this between transitions. But that's really hard in React because the components unmount and remount. So the map's going to be gone. So I'd have to figure out some way to like mount it with the old state and then, run this zoom to the new state. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. But I just plugged it into Remix to see how it would go. And it just worked because of the way that nested routing is set up. So I didn't have to write any like catching or delayed transitions or any kind of stuff. And because that map isn't part of the nested component, it never unmounts. I just execute things on it, and it does all the little animations for me.
Yeah, man.
That was kind of like a big mind-blowing moment for me. I was like, "Oh, they solved not just like the nice to have, like made a good set of trade-offs, but like this is a real problem in building apps that trips up developers all the time. Is how do I get these app-like transitions in web apps? Because it sucks in React most of the time
Yeah.
because of the way you've got to write these you got to go get a transition hook, and you have to understand how that works and all these different steps. Like that stuff is hard.
Yeah, man. Oh my gosh. I love that aspect of Remix. And wait, is this related to, or is this what you were going to talk about at Remix Conf? Was that what your proposal was?
I wasn't going to bring up that you didn't choose my talk for Remix Comp, but
I
chat,
wanted to because I
I didn't
wanted,
get selected for Remix Comp.
yeah. It was so hard because your talk was so good. You were definitely on my list. But yeah, I'm really happy with the talks that we had selected, but I'm really sad about the ones we had to say no to.
Yeah, I
Um,
can't imagine that that's an easy choice to make, especially when you've got like 1 day's worth of talks to give, right?
yeah,
Um,
uh, yeah, we're absolutely. It turns out that when you have a web framework, you have a lot more things, like a wider range of things to talk about. And so I think next year we're either going to do 2 tracks or a couple days, because we've got like talks that are about, hey, let's do some cool front end thing. But then we've got we have one that's a Remix 3D, really cool thing. I can't wait for this talk. But then we've got like, hey, let's deploy to the edge. And they're like completely different sides of the spectrum. So yeah, anyway, we're probably going to need to do a little bit more stuff in the future. But anyway, for folks who are wondering, Remix Conf at the end of May, it's going to be awesome.
yeah,
But yeah,
and even though I didn't get picked, I'm still going to be there. So if you're going to
yes,
Remix Comp, I'll see you there.
very good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I'm really happy and excited to see you.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's that's going to be a lot of fun. And I just realized I actually think I could talk just the full 90 minutes in the abstract about this, but we haven't even gotten to the feature yet, right?
Oh
So,
yeah.
so we've been talking about all the things that make Remix the framework interesting, and we haven't gotten to this feature. So you've got a new feature coming out called Remix Stacks.
Yeah.
So what is a stack? What does that mean for developers?
Yeah, so I wanted to spell it Remix STAX because I thought that'd be cool. Remix with an X and stacks with an, but I totally got shut down. They're like, no way. But yeah, so it's stacks spelled properly. But yeah, the earlier I was talking about how Remix has just nailed down app adaptability, and that's the number one thing that we're doing as developers. We're constantly changing due to changing requirements and stuff. And so, but in large part because of nested routing, as well as exposing the web platform to you, adaptability is nailed, like the mental model, everything. And so the other thing, though, that's important, an important input into the user experience is this developer experience and getting started. And a lot of people who are jumping into Remix are front-end developers like myself, who like the last thing we want to do is fiddle around with DevOps stuff. This is one of the things that drew me to Netlify was like Netlify made it just so easy to handle like here's some static files, go make magic happen and give me a way to set my custom domain. And that's what I love Netlify about for so long. Um, but when you're building a full stack app, you've got to start thinking about databases, and you've got to think about, okay, where are we going to deploy this and host it? And is it going to be a long running server, or is it going to be a serverless thing? And now we have to think about the trade-offs with serverless and connecting to a database and stuff like that. So
Right.
there are just a lot of things to think about, aside or along with having to make all these decisions. And a lot of people know what those decisions are, and they have opinions, but a ton of people don't. They have no idea. And that was me last year when I was working on my website. I did have opinions. I probably wouldn't use Stacks, honestly, because I really wanted to get into the meat of everything. But I would have referenced Stacks for sure. It
I
would have.
love one of my favorite things about working in developer experience is like, by default, you are almost never the target audience for the convenient things that you make. Cause you're
It's
like,
true.
well, yeah, like the reason I built this is because I kept playing with every stack in the world. And I was like, well, it'd be kind of fun if people could just use these stacks. I would never use this.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I also don't learn from videos from people either. So and I don't really go to workshops and stuff. So I don't read blog posts. Like it's kind of funny how that plays out. But anyway, um, the real benefit of this is, hey, we want to help you. Like you had a spark of an idea of something really cool that you want to do. And we don't want you to have to go through the mud and muck of setting up all like connecting databases and all that stuff and local development and stuff. Like even installing Prettier and ESLint and TypeScript and getting that configured is annoying. And so that's what Stacks is basically the simplest way to think about it is that it's a way from the Remix CLI to download a GitHub repo and do a little bit of setup. That's basically the idea of it, but it's a lot more powerful than that makes it sound.
And so how is this different from something like, for example, you can do create React app or npm init next or Vite or something like that? Like what sets the Remix stacks apart?
Yeah. So from the beginning, you've been able to do the same thing with Create Remix, where you can say, hey, I want to deploy to Netlify, or I want to deploy to, I just want an Express server or whatever. And so we've had these templates for a long time. What makes Stacks special is that it's an entire project with a bunch of things pre-configured for you. And in fact, what's really special about it is that you can make your own. And so this is huge for companies. Like this was basically one of the last big jobs that I did when I was at PayPal, was put together a really solid template for everybody. And they're still using it actually, which is pretty validating. It's been like 4 years now. But yeah, it's basically we have set up for you the full app, a local database configured. We show you how to get things set up on a remote database. So you just like run a couple of scripts. We have CI with GitHub Actions. We've got authentication already implemented for you,
Oh, nice.
and like a simple data model with Prisma. We have Tailwind set up. We've got Cypress set up, and even a custom command to do authenticated tests, so you don't have to run through the auth flow every single time, and some example tests of that. We've got unit tests with vtest. It's like the new Jest that's faster and better and stuff. And ESLint, TypeScript, Prettier, all like I think that's all of the major MSW for mocking third-party services that you're hitting.
Oh, nice.
All of this setup, it's amazing. It is so cool. And the idea is you have a spark of an idea and you need all of these things for pretty much any app you're going to build. But that's like our built-in stacks that we've created. We've got 3 stacks that are one deploys to fly with Postgres, and it supports multi-regional deploys, so you can deploy to many regions all over the world, just out of the box. Another is a simpler one that just uses SQLite. Surprise, surprise, SQLite is super production ready. It's amazing. It seems like it's a toy, but it's totally not, and it's awesome. And so, yeah, we've deployed a fly with SQLite. That's single region, much simpler, really good for just like, let's prove this out, and then we'll switch to Postgres later or something. And then we also have one that deploys to AWS with Architect. And Netlify is working on one to deploy to Netlify with some data persistence. And then like we'll have this is the cool thing, is like you can build your own. So take what I put together and what the team has put together for these different stacks, and fork it and make any changes that you want. You want your own prettier config, then fork it, make it your own thing, and now you can generate projects with like that. And we've got various companies. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the companies that I've been talking with, who are going to be putting together their own stacks as well. And that's where like I think most people are not going to be using our built-in ones. They'll be referencing ours and then building their own. And that's where the real benefit of this is that we've given you a really awesome reference implementation, and now you can make it work for your own infrastructure. And now as you're building new sites at your company, you can get from the idea to production in like 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think, this is also, as we're seeing, it feels like there's been a shift in the way that web dev works, where, we had at least when I was getting into more production stuff, when I was at IBM, there was the teams that built the backend services, and they would stand up these like Node containers and Docker microservices and all these other pieces, and they would kind of give those to front end developers, and the front end developers were expected to kind of piece those together and make a UI out of it. And that always felt a little bit backward to me, because it kind of felt, well, the thing that people interact with is the website. But we've seen this transition where, like as we started seeing more people moving toward first Jamstack, and now this kind of beyond Jamstack web dev that we're seeing with frameworks like Remix and Next, where it's not Jamstack anymore, but it's all running without servers. It's running without these like big, heavy backend processes that we used to have.
Yeah.
The front end devs now are kind of in this position where if you can build a good website and a little bit of Node, you're a full stack web dev now. And like that doesn't mean that you're a DB admin or a DevOps rock star or anything, but it means that the tools have evolved in such a way. If you can write a serverless function, a little bit of glue code, you can get into a little bit of like filtering an API response when it comes back. Yeah, congratulations, you're ready. You can go do full stack now.
Yeah.
And what that has meant is that, on the one hand, it's incredible. I can go out as a single dev, and I've been able to build experiences. The fact that I was able to build out the Learn with Jason website and the chat overlays and all these things and all the systems that support it on my own, not as my full-time job, kind of blows my mind sometimes, because I don't think I could have done this even 5 years ago with the tooling that existed back then, but modern tools made it more possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the other side of it, which I think is kind of is really like you get into a little bit of deadlock where I'm just a front end dev. How am I supposed to build all this stuff? Right? Like I don't know how to choose between Postgres and MySQL. Like I mean, I kind of do, but that's really just because I heard somebody grumpy on Twitter saying why they would never use MySQL or why somebody else would never use Postgres.
Yeah.
And depending on which one I've heard more from and chosen to like better, I'm like, well, I clearly don't like Postgres either, or what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I'm not making informed decisions here.
Yeah.
And so the idea of a stack feels really good, because what we're looking at is, instead like I have all this power as a front end dev, but I don't really have like a lot of opinions about specifically what database. What I want is somebody who's an expert to tell me this stack is going to be reliable.
Yeah.
And stacks appear to be that assertion of opinion. And an expert is going to put together a stack that they like and say, hey, if you want to start here, this is what I like, and this is why I like it. And you can just start building. You don't have to think about why I made the decisions I made, unless you want to dig in and learn more.
Yeah.
So yeah, it feels compelling for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember last year There came a point where I was coding up and things were going great, and then I sat back and I'm like, oh shoot, Remix turned me into a backend developer. I realized like I've been doing so much backend code. I mean, I'm doing plenty of UI and stuff, but like, holy smokes, I'm doing so much backend stuff. And so yeah, Remix kind of tricked me into being a full stack developer. But in the process, I had to figure out how do I create a Postgres cluster that can deploy to multiple regions, and stumble through all of that. And so all of those learnings are what has gone into these stacks. And then you can take what you know and put it into your own stack, and people can learn from your stacks. And the other thing that I'll mention is a lot of frameworks would abstract away a lot of this stuff. So like when we say that your stack has authentication already supported, um, we have abstractions for managing sessions with cookies, and that's
Mhm.
it. So there is not a authentication abstraction in front of you, but the abstraction is like code that we give to you, and it's less than
Got
100
it.
lines long. And so this is in large part because we expose the web platform to you. So rather than hiding everything behind an abstraction that you need to learn with knowledge that you can't transfer, we instead expose the platform to you with like talking about cookies, like you were literally getting the cookie header out of the request. And so that what's really cool about this is that it's adaptable. So you
Mhm.
don't like the way that we implemented authentication, you can change it. And the code that we gave you is pretty simple. So there are not a lot of abstractions in what we give you. And a lot of people would say, well, like what happens when you decide that your stack originally did something that wasn't as good, and you go and update the stack? Well, now I've got to go make sure that I track what you're doing so I can update that in my site. And so that's why like it's better to have a library, right? Well,
Mhm.
yeah, that is a trade-off that we're making, but I feel like it's a worthwhile trade-off to say, hey, right, or at least for right now, the best thing that we can do is give you the code so that you can make adaptations to it for the changing requirements that you're going to experience.
And it kind of feels like with the way that you've set it up here, there's nothing stopping me from swapping out your auth for using GitHub OAuth that I then put that into the same cookie
Hmm.
and use all the other mechanisms the same way, but change how I'm authorizing somebody,
Yeah,
or switching
precisely.
it out for like an Okta or Auth0 or some kind of like fully baked in system. The nice thing about it is that by using the platform, like that's kind of what you were going to do anyways. Like when I use Auth0, they're giving you instructions on where do you save the token that comes back from Auth0. Well, you should probably put it in a cookie, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So now it's just kind of connecting those dots on like, well, okay, I want to use whatever abstraction over this because that's what my company says we need to use, or I don't want to, they already do GDPR in a way that I don't want to have to be responsible for, so I'm going to outsource it to them, or whatever the thing is, right? And then you just have the plumbing of how to hook that into your app kind of ready made there for you. So yeah, I like that. um with that, we are halfway through this episode. We haven't even looked at any code yet. So, getting a lot of questions about. I see that both Ryan and Michael are in the chat. So, welcome to both of you. Thank you for being in here answering questions. But let's maybe take a look at these. Right. Let's give them a try. So, I'm going to switch us over to camera 2.
and we did get a new experimental release that fixes one bug,
Oh,
hopefully,
so
and
we're
doesn't
good.
introduce any new ones. So I'm going to send that to you, and
Perfect.
you can use that command instead.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by saying this episode, like all episodes, is being live captioned by White Coat Captioning. We've got Amanda here with us today. Thank you very much for being here. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, NX, and Backlight all kicking in to make the show more accessible and just help keep the lights on in a general way. I also saw a handful of folks subscribe today. So thank you very much for the subs. See Orphan subscribe, Charlie Dev subscribe, Peruvian Idol. I saw Dom talking about his 21-month streak. Holy crap. Thank you for that. Uh, really appreciate all you. It helps me do a lot more fun things with the show, and that means a lot to me. We are talking to Kent C. Dodds today. If you don't already follow Kent on Twitter, make sure you head over there and do that. And we're talking about remix.run today. So if you are not familiar, go give that site a quick look through. And earlier we were talking about Remix Comp. So if you want to hang out with Kent and me and Ryan and Michael, and I think just about everybody. I think a lot of folks in the industry are going to be there. Mark your calendars, get your tickets, and come out and hang out with us. Okay, and that's the end of what I know to do. So Ken, if I want to get started with Stacks, what's my first step here?
All right. So in the future, maybe later today, or maybe just later, you're gonna run npx create remix, and that's it, and you should be able to do it. But I sent you a chat with an experimental version that you need to attach onto this, and anybody can feel free to use it. Just keep in mind it's experimental. So yeah, that's the one. So go ahead and run that.
Here we go. Need to proceed, yes.
And it's going to ask you again if you want to install another package, and say yes.
Here we go.
Part of the experimental thing we're going to fix.
All right, so we're rocking and rolling here.
Okay, so
where
now
would I like to
create
my app? Okay, so I'm going to call this Remix Stacks. This is under the Learn with Jason repo.
Okay, and you want the pre-configured stack ready for production.
Okay.
And then before you choose, I'll describe what each one of these are. So we have blues, indie, and grunge. Those are music genres. And so it's difficult to put into a single name all of the things that these stacks do. And so because of that, we just we decided to go with music genres for all these stacks. And so the blues stack is deployed to fly. It has all of the stuff I was talking about, like Cypress and authentication, everything, Tailwind, all that stuff. But what's unique about it is that it's all ready for you to deploy to multiple regions. And it supports Postgres and has a local database running in Docker there. The indie stack is very similar, except instead of Postgres, it uses SQLite. So it's quite a bit easier to get set up if you don't have Docker, especially. That's probably the one we're going to do today, just because it's a little easier. It also deploys to fly. And then the grunge stack is the one that uses Architect, and it uses DynamoDB as its the persistence layer, using Architect's utility functions and stuff. It deploys on AWS. So I think Indie would probably be the most straightforward one for us. So let's go with that.
Okay. Here we go with Indie. Do I want to run npm install? I do.
Let's go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. We're building things out, and we're going to see how well my my fiber internet's doing today.
Yeah.
Seems like we're okay. We're okay.
Eric Rasmussen's watching, and he said it can't wait for the death metal stack.
We were joking around about this in the Netlify Slack about what we should call our stack, and we're going to call it the Jam Band Slack.
Yeah, I love it.
It's got to be the trap stack.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so go ahead and CD into the Remix Stacks.
Oh, wait, let me actually get into the right window here. Remix Stacks.
So before you open up any, you can open it up, but I want to look at that terminal output really quick.
Sure.
So you'll notice that first disk says running remix.init script. So one cool thing about Stacks is that in the template, you can have a directory called remix.init, and in there you have an index.js, and you can have a package.json and stuff. And that allows you as the template author to have any sort of setup that you want. So after all dependencies have been installed, you can use Inquirer or something to ask further questions. So you could even have it provision a database for you. And you just say, hey, like, what region do you want this to be in, or whatever. You can do anything that you want to as part of your setup, which I think that's pretty sweet. Makes it pretty powerful for folks.
It's definitely exciting.
Yeah. Yep. Another thing that we skipped over on this that is coming soon is eventually we're going to support. So let me first start by saying the stacks are all written in TypeScript, but not everybody wants to use TypeScript. I don't understand it, but I respect it. And so for that reason, if the Remix CLI notices that your template has a TS config, then it will actually ask them, hey, do you want to remove the TypeScript? And if you say yes, then it will actually automatically remove all the TypeScript from the project. So you as a template author don't have to have like a JavaScript, TypeScript version or anything. You just put in your tsconfig, and now we'll get rid of it for you. Okay, sweet. So yeah, so let's pull it open. And the first thing that you do when you start a new project is what? When a project has been
I got
generated
this wrong
for
last
you.
time. You read the README.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That was Ryan mentioned or asked you that on the last one. You read the README. Yeah, that's hilarious. So, so this explains what's in the stack. You can look through that later if you like. Scroll down a bit, and we're gonna just go through these steps. So we're actually gonna deploy this. I believe we'll have time to do this. So you'll want to sign into Fly. So if you don't already have an account on Fly, then you'll want to get Fly installed. Now here, I'll just ask this first. If you don't already have an account on Fly, then you need to sign up for one, and they require a credit card. This is so they can reduce abuse of their platform. So that's one reason why the Netlify stack will be really cool, because you won't need to provide a credit card. But yeah, so you will need to install Fly, log in, provide a credit card, which you may want to drag off into a different screen when you do that.
I will do that in a different window here.
Yeah.
Okay, got that one. And then once I
yeah,
have it,
yep.
I guess I can go back to the README, which has all this in
Yeah,
there
the
as well.
README would say the same thing. Yep.
Let's see if I have one. So I'm going to try logging in over here, off browser, seeing if I got it.
And while you're doing that, I should mention that if you follow these instructions, you should not be charged anything, because we're using all free tier level stuff in the Indy stack. If you use the blue stack, we're expecting that you're planning on really doing something for production, and you will pay a Fly for
hackers. You dirty hackers.
What is?
Every time the chat wants me to show all my secrets, and I'm not going to do it, chat. Okay, so it says now that I am authenticated. All right, awesome. So back to the README.
Sweet. So now
that's just not something I'm willing to do.
That's great. So yeah, now you'll run the Prisma migrate script there. So what this is going to do is it's going to initialize your SQL database with your Prisma schema. We've got a user, a password, which this is interesting. A lot of people ask about this. It's pretty common to separate the user and the password models so that you don't accidentally send the user with the password hash to the client. So like when you're querying for the user, you don't want to send along. It's fine if you send along the password ID, I guess, not a big deal. But if you send the hash, that's not good. So we separate those models and we handle that for you. And then the app itself is just a note-taking app, and so we have a note model for you. That's probably something you're going to delete when you get started, but we wanted to have at least something there. So yeah, this created your SQLite database and set up all the tables. And actually interesting, if you look at the Prisma migrations directory, you can see all the SQL commands in that init file. Like this is so cool. Prisma is awesome. I'm actually wearing my Prisma shirt today, which you can't really see, but it is Prisma. I love that Prisma generates SQL for you for the migrations, and they're committed to source control. That is such a cool feature. So that's all that script did, was it ran this to create the SQLite database and set it up for your models.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice. Back to the README.
Now we're going to run the build. It's always good to run the build as the first thing to make sure that everything's set up properly. And so this is going to build your Tailwind file. And
we don't need it, y'all. We don't need it. It's already done.
Yeah, it's less than a second, my friends. I love this. Like, look, that last line, the remix part of that was 196 milliseconds. The Tailwind was 169 milliseconds. That is interesting. 169 and 196. There you go. Nice. So yeah, so it's nice and fast. Now you can finally run the dev server. So if you scroll down a little bit, that's going to be the next step.
Okay, so let's go npm run dev.
And so this is going to run Tailwind on the one side, and then it runs Remix on the other. But it also, you notice there's the mock server running. That's MSW has been installed during development. so that you can, if you're like hitting the GitHub API or you're hitting like podcast API, and you want to be able to like go up in the mountains and work, you want to be able to mock out what those responses are going to be, or maybe you have like a rate limiting problem or something. And so MSW is there for you to set up mocks for all of that stuff.
Got it.
And so, yeah, there we go. There's the indie stack. And I forgot which band this is. Ryan is really particular about the bands. He's probably going to laugh at me for not knowing which band this is, but they're an indie band and they're great, I guess.
I'm one of the people who like, I never know what bands look like. Like I don't watch music videos and stuff, so I'm always like, I'm sorry, I don't know what band this is.
Yeah, or I don't even know, like I'll listen to the song like, yeah, I love this song. Who's it by? I have no idea. So like I just don't know band names. And the same way with actors and actresses, like I just don't know. Okay, so yeah, you can go ahead and let's just sign up. Let's take a look at what we've got. You can create whatever email address and password. We do not ship like a email confirmation or anything. We may eventually add that to this stack because that's probably pretty common. But now you can view notes for Jason at langsdorf.com and create a new note. And there you go. And then you can create as many notes as you want. It's all nested routing and magic stuff going on here. And then you can delete. Woo! Yeah, it's a real database.
This is cool. Like it's really nice how fast this was. And then if I go and sign out, right, then I can log in.
And that remember me checkbox actually works as well. Most remember me checkboxes don't work, but that one does.
I'm going to set up a second account. Oops. And no notes.
And there you go.
And then log in with my other one again. I can.
Yeah, you got to type the password right or it won't work. And we do have validation as well. So that's all built in. It'll show the validation. It works nicely on a screen reader. So that's all set up for you.
Oh, so if I like try to save, oh yeah, title is required. Nice. This is pretty slick.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's pretty neat. And so those are all the technologies that we're using. You could run the Cypress test if you wanted to. You can run Prettier and stuff. We've got scripts for running linting Prettier. We've got unit test in there as an example. So do you want to get this deployed to production now?
Yeah, I mean, I want to run these tests and just kind of see what's happening out of the box here. So let's run the end-to-end testing.
Yeah. So what this is doing now is it's getting the app started in dev mode because you're running the headed Cypress. So like this is kind of a Cypress driven development thing. You have a Cypress test running, you make some changes, the Cypress test reruns. And so yeah, it starts up the app in dev mode. And then it's starting up Cypress. The first time you start up Cypress of a certain version, it needs to I don't even know what it does. It like verifies.
I think it's like installing it to my my like computer user account so that it doesn't have to do that between builds.
Yeah. So it takes a sec, but once it finally loads up, we have one test in here called smoke. And so this is your basic smoke test. And yeah, you can go ahead and click that and open that one up. Or yeah, just run it there. Excuse me. And that should have opened Edge. It looks like Edge 98. It's over on your left, I think. Where is it? It's somewhere. It's running. I see like the output in the terminal. It is running somewhere.
Yeah, I saw it pop up and then it disappeared. Oh, where'd you go? It keeps trying to come back. Still waiting to connect. Okay, I'm
Oh,
not sure
here.
what's going on.
Go ahead,
I'm
go
gonna.
ahead and stop it, and you can change which browser it's using. How do you stop it? I always just use Chrome, but
Yeah, how do I?
if you hover over
Man.
smoke, is there a way to stop it there? Oh no, it's just open an ID. Well, you may need to turn it off and back on again.
Yeah, turn it off and on again. I'm gonna blame that on my setup because I'm always tweaking different configs and CLI stuff. So I probably broke something in
Yeah, that's
my
okay.
own
It is
setup.
pretty cool to watch it like go through everything, but anybody who's seen end-to-end testing, they know it looks great. So and the tests are really like pretty straightforward. So you can continue off with those. Okay, so if you go, yeah, you can take a look at it in Cypress ETE and smoke. So the first one just creates random login form, visits the homepage, goes to sign up, types in the email and password, creates the account, goes to the notes page to make sure it can, then goes to log out, and then it verifies that the login button is there again. And then here we skip that whole login process and we just have a command called login, which actually hits our database directly to say, hey, go make me a user and give me back the cookie value so I can be logged in.
Oh.
So that command takes like, I haven't timed it, but I'm guessing it takes like 500 milliseconds or faster. So it's much faster than like typing through the whole login flow.
Sure.
And so then like you just use that if you want an authenticated test. And so this one's going to go through the create and delete of a note. And that's what that does.
Very cool. Yeah. So, and what I like about this is, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised given that this has been like testing has been a big part of your platform over the years. But what I like about this is that the tests we're looking at are things that people are going to try to do in the app, not a test to make sure that a div exists or that the class name is correct, or things that are guaranteed to change over time.
Yeah.
Right. And that to me, that is such a nice, like, I want to make sure my users can continue to do the important stuff on my app. I literally do not care if somebody changes it from a div to a span. I mean, like, unless it's going to have some impact on accessibility, I could care less.
Totally.
And so I love that what we're doing here is actually testing flows. And
Well, and you
teach
get
by example, right?
you get accessibility benefits here as well because we're finding by roles rather than like searching for divs and stuff. So if you were to switch the logout button from a button to a span, as long as you made it accessible, which is very difficult to do, so don't do that. But if you did, then the test would continue to work. So yeah, implementation detail free and refactor friendly is what I like to say.
Refactor friendly. I do like that. Okay, so we've got we talked for 45 minutes, and then in about 5 we built an app.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get this deployed. I want to
Let's
let's
do
get
it.
this on production. So go to the README again, scroll up a bit, and here the first thing is you need to make a repo for this.
Okay,
For
so
the thing.
let's
You don't want
deploy
to push
this.
it yet, but yeah, we'll make the repo because we want to add a GitHub secret to it.
Oh, so we would need to add code.
That's right. That's right. And we'll say, do I need just create the repo?
Just make the repo so we can add a secret to the action, and then we'll push this once once everything's been set up.
And we're going to call this remix stacks. I love the GitHub CLI.
Yeah, that's nice. I am cursed with the GitHub's old hub project that was like an alias to Git, and so now I can't use anything else because that's all I know.
I when I switched computers, like a year or so ago, they had moved from Bash to Z Shell.
Oh
And I
yeah.
had to move everything over. I was like, look, if I have to learn Z Shell, I'm gonna also learn this GitHub CLI, like learn it all at once. And
Yeah, I should have done that.
no regrets, as they say. All right, so create a public repository. Here we go. Clone the new repository locally. No.
No, we'll just hook this one up to that one. So yeah, go ahead and get that opened up.
Oh, wait, I just did this on the J Langsdorff. Whatever, it's fine. We'll just use that one.
I was distracting.
Okay, so now we've got a get remote.
Cool.
Is it browse? You. Oh, I can't spell.
Okay, sweet. So you'll go to your settings here and secrets and actions. And so this is another thing you want to do in secret because you need to add a repository secret. And you can look at that in the README, what it's supposed to be called. I think it's like fly secret something. Yeah, fly API token.
Okay, so we're going to create a fly API token, and the way I'm going to get that is by going over
following that.
here.
Yep.
Okay. Can you hear the work being done on my house in the background? Sorry about that, everybody.
No, I don't. What are you doing?
We're redoing our kitchen right now, so we've got them finishing up the floors and stuff.
Nice.
All right. So then I need to go to this.
I'm looking forward to doing that when my kids are older, and I know they won't destroy it like they've done to to the wood floors we've got now. I'm just like looking at the wood floors and seeing all the scratches and just like, yep, it's fine. This is what kids do. It's going to be really nice when they're older and they're not doing this anymore, and we can get nice
No
floors.
kidding. Whoops. All right. So I've got a token. I'm copying my token. And apparently I did have a fly account because I just found, or no, fly UI. So this is the one that I must have created in the thing. And then this is the one that I just created. So I'm going to close that. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to put this token into GitHub off screen here. And now when I come back across, wait, that doesn't show it, right? No, it doesn't.
You hackers, you dirty hackers.
And now we have our fly API token.
Okay, cool. So this is ready. We're almost ready to get this deployed. So now we're just going to create a couple things. You scroll up just a little bit. We skipped over the fly create command. So copy both of those and you just stick them right in the terminal. And you can choose whatever region you want. The SQLite only deploys to a single region. And so I'd normally just do the closest one to me.
Yeah, Seattle is closest to me.
So we're creating two apps. One is for production and the other is for staging. So built into this stack is a GitHub action that will deploy the dev branch to staging and the main branch to production. So you've got a staging production set up here. So now we'll go back, and one thing that as part of authentication, we signed the session so that people can't just like make up their own session. And so that's what this online 91 is doing, is we're creating
a quick question before we do that. Did this get generated by the remix stacks? Yeah. So it took the repo name and then like a random hash. So this is something that will be different in everybody's project, which is why I was able to copy paste it and not like do the fly create your repo name here.
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. And the other thing is that it has to be globally unique across all of Fly, which is why we have that random little couple characters at the end.
Got it.
So it basically takes the name of the folder that you created where you put your app. So yeah, so this is going to set the secrets. Yeah, you can go ahead and execute that. This will set the secret and hit yes on this one. And I'll explain why that showed up in a second. But yeah, so this creates a session secret environment variable, which our authentication cookie serializer, deserializer uses. And then the reason it was asking that question is because we've actually got two apps, but the fly configuration for this project only cares about the production one. And so when you were trying to do something with staging, it's like, hey, you're trying to do something with a different app than the one that's configured here. Are you sure? So that's what that was.
I gotcha.
And then the OpenSSL thing will only work for people who are on Macs or who have OpenSSL installed. And so if you don't, we have a link to 1Password's password generator. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just that it exists.
Gotcha.
Okay, cool. So now we need to, so we've got an app ready to send your node server to. We've got an environment variable there ready to handle authentication. Now we need to have the persistence layer. And every time you deploy your app, it's like a completely different file system, everything. And so we need to persist some data. And because SQLite is a on file disk database, we're going to create a persistent volume that will persist through deploys. So that's what this does.
Got it.
It creates one for both production and staging that are 1 GB in size for those particular apps.
Okay. Off we go. And this all fits under the free tier?
Yep, this should all fit under the free tier.
Okay, so we've got our persistent regions for the staging and production app.
Yep, and that is it. So now you can git commit init and push, and then we'll go and take a look at the action.
Okay. And then somewhere in Fly.
You'll want to look at the action because on GitHub. Yep, on GitHub. So Fly is not a CI server. Actually, you'll go to the Actions tab.
Actions.
There you go.
Yeah.
And there it is. That's your init deploy. So our GitHub Actions supports running ESLint, TypeScript, vtest, and Cypress all in parallel along with the build. So it runs them all. And if all of those finish successfully, then we'll go on to the deploy step.
Gotcha.
And yeah, it takes a couple minutes to run the build and everything because the build is creating a Docker container. And so the remix build itself like takes less than a second, but building Docker does not. And we do, yeah, please hold. We do cache. That's part of the Docker container that we generate for you. Will actually cache things for you. So your subsequent builds should be a little bit faster. And actually, Cypress ends up being the bottleneck here. Which of course it will, that increases over time as you add tests. You can use Cypress to run these in parallel as well. So those tests in parallel, or just like split them up across a different matrix. On my site, I have 3 running at once. They just split my tests across 3 runners. But this is all set up for you automatically in the GitHub action. And it's the same action file, regardless of whether you're deploying to staging or production. And the only difference is we have it'll be in the .github directory at the top there. So if you scroll down to the very bottom, this is the only place where we branch between staging and production. So those last 2 steps or 2, whatever those things are called, we have if the GitHub ref is dev, then we're going to deploy to staging. If it's main, then we'll deploy to production.
Got it. So I need to call my branch dev for this to work.
Yep. Yeah, for staging. Yep. And then of course, like this is yours once you've generated it. So you can change it. You can fork ours and change it if you want to do a staging branch instead, and then just generate your own that way.
So a question that came up about how these are kind of rolling out is like, pretty quickly once I start using this, it's going to diverge from the original code. So is there a way to pull updates or anything as improvements get made to say like the auth layer or something?
Yeah, there's no way to do that officially, and especially since you're not actually forking the repo. There's no like Git magic to make that work. If you really felt like that was important or that you really wanted that, then instead of using remix create, you would just fork it, clone it, run the init script manually or whatever, or do what the init script does manually. And then you could be on the same Git history and easily pull in changes. You might even be able to, even if you don't do that, you might even be able to like take patches and apply them to your own code base or something like with magic GitHub stuff. But I don't think that people need to be super concerned about that because like the setup is going to diverge as soon as you start working on your project anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's worth looking at this just to get a sense of, how what are we really up against here, right? Because a lot of these are going to be pretty straightforward. Like the root file, I imagine, doesn't get. Yeah, this doesn't look like it gets too wild. And so, where should people look to kind of get a sense of what they're up against when they're? What are you starting with when you install a stack?
Yeah, totally. So, well, stacks in general, it's going to be different for everyone. For the 3 stacks that we're starting with, the code across them is actually all very similar. The only differences are in the models. Well, actually, for the Fly and Prisma ones, everything in the app directory is the same except like what picture we show and whether it says indie or blues or whatever. So like they're all basically the same. For the difference between the Fly ones and the AWS ones is mostly in the models directory and in the DB server because AWS is serverless. There's also no health check on AWS. Oh, by the way, there's a health check, which is pretty cool. That Fly uses to make sure that your app is still up and running and it can fall back to other versions and stuff, and it won't deploy if this doesn't work and stuff like that. So that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really nice.
But yeah, so there are only a handful of things that are different. So as far as what you have here, you have a simple way to connect to your database right here in the DB server. This is a little bit more complex in the multi-regional one because you have read-write replicas and stuff. So connecting to all that is a little more challenging. But this is not a file that you touch very often at all. Let's see. Yeah, the user and notes models are also this is just anything that we interact with our database is going to happen in here. You of course can like interact with the database directly in your loader if you want to, but
and this is just built into Prisma, right? So we don't have to write password hashing because they're going to do that for us. So we don't have to worry about.
We actually do. It's on line 15. We're using bcrypt.
Line 15.
Yeah.
Bcrypt. Okay, so we're doing a bcrypt. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah, and bcrypt is pretty great. I only recently figured out like how password hashes work recently, like the modern way to do password hashes. And as it turns out, the best, most secure password hash is one where the only library that can create the hash is slow. So like slow is a feature, which is like really interesting to me. That's how that works. But yeah, so that's what we're using there is bcrypt.
Right. Yeah. So we're storing a hashed password. Prisma kind of handles that for us. And the thing that's interesting here is like we're looking through. This is a full app that's got a database setup. It's got a notes model. So a full, well, not quite full CRUD, but create.
The only thing
read, delete.
we're missing in the UI is update. Yeah.
And you've got persistence, you've got deployment scripts, you've got all this stuff, and each of these files is like 50 lines of code.
Yeah, man.
The notes one is 45 lines of code. DB server is 23 lines of code, and this stuff here, these are all React components. So we're not looking at like this is all stuff you can effectively throw away if you're not going to.
Yeah, you just delete it.
Yeah. And so that I think that's pretty cool that we're seeing that here in that this isn't it's not a heavy boilerplate. It's just,
but it's a really powerful one, right? Like
I've been thinking about this more and more as I've been, because like one of the things that we're trying to figure out at Netlify is like the goal is developer productivity, right? Like if we really boil down what Netlify sells as a product, it's developer productivity. And so when I'm thinking about what that means, it's like there are 3 buckets of web dev. There's the app logic, the idea that you have that you want to build and interact with on screen. There is the deployment, like the ops side of things. You got to wire together the CI/CD and the whatever the hosting is and all these, the routing and the DNS, all that kind of development. And then there's the foundation, like the boilerplate. You got to wire together all these pieces and make sure that they're talking, and you've got security and you're protecting your keys. And what I've been really steering toward is like, I think what developer productivity is just automating those 2 buckets, the DevOps and the boilerplate, because those are the things that, especially for a lot of modern web apps, they just don't change. Like typically they're going to be whatever your company does. That's what your company does. And, you know, at Netlify, obviously we are invested in getting people to use Netlify as those two buckets of how you deploy and set up your boilerplate. But like, we just want you to be able to work on the logic of your app. And that's what these stacks are doing. It's the boilerplate and that connector code. And then you, like, I just come in and I'm immediately writing logic. I'm not trying to figure out how do I get my database connected to my front end, connected to my serverless function. Like, I don't have to worry about that. It's all done. So this feels like a good, starting point. It's not heavy. It's not throwing a bunch of opinions at me. I haven't looked at your ESLint config yet to see whether or not that offends me, but
we're unlikely to offend you because Ryan had to sign off on that, and he hates ESLint more than anybody.
Oh yeah, this is lightweight. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to know that when you're doing this, it's not like some boilerplates that I've used, the whole first day is backing out decisions from the boilerplate.
Yeah.
And I like that when I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, I could just delete like a decent amount of this and it would all be fine.
Totally. And you know, I've long said that I will never use a generator I didn't make myself. And that's always been the case for me. I do not like using generators. And so that's what I think is so special about Stacks is that we make it so you can fork this this project and make any changes you want to it. You don't like Tailwind? Feel free to remove it. That's fine. You don't have to have Tailwind. We really like Tailwind, and we think we're kind of betting on it. But yeah, you don't like Prisma? You don't want to use Postgres? Like whatever it is. If you refresh, this is actually GitHub's problem. This is done. This finished minutes ago.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
done. GitHub is doing
Um,
something weird because that's totally done. The whole thing, I'm looking at it now. It took 5 minutes, 5.5 minutes, and it'll be faster next time since things are cached now.
Got it. Oh, 5 minutes 29. Okay. Yeah. So to see this live, I'm going to. Does it show me
it's going to be your app URL .fly or your app name .fly.dev.
Got it. Look at that,
Boom.
friends. So now everybody, if you want to go and play with this, you can go actually like sign up for this app and log in and give it a try. And now each of these is going to be a separate instance. So my local database is separate from my production database, is separate from my staging database. Yep. Probably there's a way that Prisma would move between the two if I needed it to, but I don't care in this particular instance. So I'm just going to sign up with a new email. Okay, go and do my notes. And we got notes. And these are all like publicly addressable. Yeah, that's nice.
But they're also private, so I can't just copy that URL.
Yeah, so like y'all can't see this if you go and try to get this note.
But here's a challenge for anybody. Go ahead and take this and make it so I have a little button that adds like share publicly, and now all of a sudden this is made public. Like that would be maybe like a 10-minute feature for somebody who knows what they're doing with all the tech, and like less than an hour feature for somebody who doesn't know anything about it.
Yeah. Well, and it's also a good, like, I can see this as being a great way for different database platforms to show off the different features, right? Like I'm thinking about like Hasura is going to love this because they can show off how fast they can do the role-based access control. And like Supabase is going to love this because it's got the auth and everything is all tied in together. And they're going to be like, wow, look, you can just do it this way. And, I'm just kind of thinking through all these different partners and how they're going to jump in and make these cool stacks. And all of them are going to do the same thing. And so, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of in the early days when we were all trying to evaluate like Backbone and React and Angular and stuff, when we had the to-do app and like everybody would build the same app with the same front end using different stacks. So you could kind of compare how you would go about doing different things. This feels kind of like that, where I've got this common front end, so I know what I'm expecting it to do, and I can go look at how much work was it for me to go from 0 to like this database is connected or that database is connected. You know, like when we go to put planet scale in, how does that stack up against FaunaDB, and how much work is it for me? And also, as I'm scaling it, like which things are going to be easy or hard, right? And so I'm really excited to see more companies kind of buy into this and give it a try and see how it all goes.
Yeah, and let's make that a thing. We'll say, how does that stack up? And everybody understands we're talking about remix stacks now.
But no, I think I think this is really great. So a couple people have asked. Tony just put the GitHub link in there. Thanks for doing that, Tony. Folks were asking about when this is going to come out. I think some folks joined late, so if you just want to let everyone know.
Yeah, so we were planning on having this released in time for this live stream, but that didn't quite happen. But we are close. So if we end up still doing a release this week, it'll happen today. But at the latest, it'll be next week.
And if somebody wants to be the first to know, I'm going to guess that the Twitter might be the right place to follow.
Yeah. Keep up with us on Twitter. I've got a blog post about this that'll come out when it's officially published. We also have a newsletter, so you can go to remix.run/ oh shoot, I don't know what it is. Newsletter. Yep, that makes sense. And I'll publish on there as well for folks, so you can take a look at that. I just pasted the link in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Okay. It's definitely lost.
Yeah, no, you're good. The Remix Run homepage is kind of fun. So if you haven't scrolled that yet, give that a look. And then, yeah, our Discord is also really active. So check out the Discord as well. And I feel like there was something else I was going to mention about that, but I'm coming at a loss. So that is it. We're super excited about stacks. I really fully expect people to use custom stacks more often than they use the built-in ones. That's my hope, because I think that's where they're really mostly beneficial in being able to make your own stacks.
So I think, yeah, I can see that for like production work, but what I love about this as a learning exercise is that if what I'm trying to do is build something and prototype, right? Being able to say, well, this stack will like give me a database and then I don't have to deal with it. I can just prototype this thing out and throw it up for someone to look at. Like,
Yeah.
what a power up, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about the Discord, we talked about the newsletter, we talked about Twitter. I'm going to throw your Twitter out there too. Make sure you go and give Kent a follow on Twitter if you don't already. Let's do one more shout to the conf. If you want to come hang out with Kent and Michael and Ryan and the rest of the Remix team, I'll be there. I know a bunch of folks are out there. They just announced the speakers. It's a solid list. So
and actually, if you scroll down on that on the sponsors section, there's a pretty cool sponsor in there too. Yeah, keep going down to the community there. Look at those awesome community partners.
Hey,
oh,
look at all those sponsors.
Holy smokes, there's a really awesome company at the bottom right there. Whoa, what is that?
So yeah, come hang out. Come hang out with us there. We'll see you there. Any other links that people should have before we wrap this up?
Well, check out the blog later. I don't think so. The stacks are public. I made them public last night. So if you go to the Remix Run GitHub, then you can find all of the templates for those. So you can start making your own stacks if you want. And then also, if you want to play with this before we release, feel free. Just keep in mind it's experimental. But if you go to the experimental releases on the Remix repo, then you can just say npx create remix at that version. And that's exactly what we did. So if you want to play around with this before we get it released,
this is the one we used, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So y'all saw it here first. Remix stacks. They seem like a promising way to prototype, to build your own default starter stack, especially if you're working on big teams and you want to build some consistency and quickness into your process. I would have killed to have these when I worked at IBM. So I think that's going to be all for us today. Let's give one more shout out. We've had Amanda from White Coat Captioning here all day. Thank you so much for being here. And that's made possible through our sponsors, Netlify NX, backlight, all kicking in to make this show more accessible to everybody. Appreciate that very much. While you're checking out things on the site, make sure you go and look at the schedule, because we got some bangers coming up. Redwood JS is coming back, going 1.0 this week, so we're going to look at that on Thursday. And then we've got Hakon coming in to talk about building a page 100 e-commerce site. We're going to do some command bar stuff. If you aren't familiar with command bar, this is the like Command K to do anything on the site. Command bar is a company that lets you do that. We're doing TRPC. We're doing node image generation and a bunch of stuff that I've been too lazy to put on the site. So make sure you go add this on Google Calendar so that you get updated whenever things are true. You can also follow on Twitch to get notified whenever I go live. Thank you, Kent, so much for hanging out with us today. This was an absolute blast. Any parting words for everybody?
I just want to say thank you for having me, and thanks for being nice. Jason, you're an excellent example of the kind of people that we want in our community. So thank you. I just encourage everybody to be as kind as Jason is. And I think that the world would be a better place. So thank you.
Well, that's my warm fuzzy for the day. All right, chat. As always, thank you so much for hanging out. We're going to go raid Ben. So stay tuned, and we will see you all next time.
Bye.